When it comes to mythical creatures in history, I'm sure we all have our favorite that we hope actually existed in the world. If you ask my friends which one is my favorite, they'd probably all say unicorns. But contrary to popular belief, I'm quite partial to Nessie. Or vampires. Now, sadly, she didn't qualify for this list today, but who do you think will? Let me know in the comments and let's get into it. So I know Moby Dick isn't a myth in the traditional sense of the word, as he's the bane of Captain Ahab's existence in the book by Herman Melville. Still, the idea of a vengeful and vindictive whale has permeated the modern zeitgeist, as you will, as the target of one's obsession, which is mythical in its own right. So it turns out that in 1820, Captain George Pollard Jr. was in command of the Essex when it was sunk by a whale. He survived and returned to Nantucket, where he was given the two brothers to captain, but after 2 years, he crashed out on a coral reef and was thereafter determined to be unlucky at sea. His troubles with the Essex came from a 85-foot albino sperm whale, which directly attacked and smashed into the ship. The whale returned to attack the vessel at greater speed, and the Essex began taking on water, leaving the men to flee. Pollard was away from the vessel when the attack occurred. When he returned shortly after the whale slammed into the vessel a second time, he saw his first mate, Owen Chase, who told him, "We have been stove by a whale." And with that, the legend that would become Moby Dick was born. Pretty neat, eh? Alrighty, Phineas and Ferb fans, this one's for you. The myth of the platypus is an interesting one due to the obvious fact that the creature does exist, but what we know now and what people believed in Europe in the 18th century is kind of a different story. The platypus was first described by Captain John Hunter in 1798. He sent a platypus pelt and a sketch of the animal to Britain, which was a common thing for sailors and naturalists to do when they found something new. Unfortunately, the naturalists in Britain were like, I don't think this is gonna exist. This feels fake. And as a result, a myth grew surrounding a very real creature. The platypus was finally described in scientific literature by George Shaw, who wrote, "A degree of skepticism is not only pardonable, but laudable, and I ought perhaps to acknowledge that I almost doubt the testimony of my own eyes with respect to the structure of this animal's beak, yet must confess that I can perceive no appearance of any deceptive preparation, nor can the most accurate examination of expert anatomists discover any deception in this particular. The platypus is such a strange animal that its first description in scientific literature came with a caveat look regarding its authenticity, which makes perfect sense when you think about it. I didn't even know it was real until I was in university, if my memory's correct. And it was such a mind flip when I found out. I was like, really? This little creature that was on TV? That's real? And a unicorn isn't? I'm sure we all know by now that the Kraken is a massive and mighty creature from deep beneath the sea that pulls ships down to the depths with its mighty tentacles. Tales of this monster can be found throughout European literature, and it is often described as a massive creature that resembled a floating island or was so large its tentacles could pull entire vessels under the sea. Turns out sailors have been describing strange creatures for millennia after millennia after millennia, and while most beasts described by them over the years proved to be wildly inaccurate, not everything was. The Kraken may have been described as a violent creature that sank ships, but it was actually just a colossal squid. They can reach lengths of up to 33 feet and weigh in at 1,500 pounds, making them pretty monstrous in size. They do have strong tentacles, which are filled with suction cups, like other squids, octopi. But these nasty buggers also have large hooked claws, giving it a grabbing advantage over others of its kind. These animals have been known for thousands of years, but were only first described in 1925. The first live specimen wasn't captured till 2007, but tales of the beast's mighty tentacles likely gave birth to the myth of the Kraken, as they have washed up on beaches around the world throughout history. Crazy to think about what else might be lurking in the sea, just waiting to be discovered. Okay, here's the one everybody thinks is my favorite. So unicorns are white horses with a large spiraled horn sticking up from their foreheads, and while I know there have been tales about many different colored creatures and variations throughout time, let's not overcomplicate things, okay? So they are often associated with magic and have been described for most of history throughout many world cultures. They were described in ancient Greece by Pliny the Younger and a lot of other folks, and the Reum, as it is described in the Christian Bible, kind of resembles a unicorn. This myth has evolved over time from various descriptions of real animals, and the most likely source in European history stems once again from Pliny the Elder, the description of the rhinoceros. He wrote in the 1st century CE that it has the head of a stag, the feet of an elephant, and the tail of a boar. It has a single black horn which projects from the middle of its forehead. Over time, this description morphed through tall tales into the unicorn, but another source in Europe also helped push the belief in this majestic beast. Norse Vikings would take narwhal tusks to Europe and sell them to people as unicorn horns. Because folks had never seen a narwhal or a unicorn, the explanation worked, and people traded so-called unicorn horns for centuries. Fun fact, I've actually held a real narwhal horn, so technically I've held a unicorn horn, and I think that's pretty cool if I say so myself. I'm also a birthday party performer, and I've done a lot of different unicorn parties, so I've been a unicorn. Ooh, I might take back what I said about Nessie being my favorite for a moment. Tales of mermaids, a race of half-human and half-fish hybrids that live in the ocean, are a common sailor's tale and a popular fairy tale. Surprisingly, many of those stories are actually real, even though they might be a little exaggerated. Mermaids do exist. Christopher Columbus even spotted 3 during his first trip to America. He described them as not so beautiful as they are said to be, for their faces had some masculine traits. What do I mean by masculine? Don't worry. Well, the creatures we call mermaids are actually just manatees, and their closely related cousins, dugongs. Both animals are called sea cows because of their huge size and are the largest aquatic herbivores in the world. Sailors mistook them for mermaids because of their unique human and fish-like characteristics. A fully grown sea cow is about 6 feet long, which is around the height of an adult human. They have 5 human-like finger bones on their flippers and can turn their necks and stand in shallow waters like a human. Put in their fish-like rear ends that sometimes stick out of the water, and bada bing, bada boom, you have one bona fide mermaid. Dragons are probably the most common mythical creatures out there. Their looks vary, but the most common descriptions indicate that they had reptile-like bodies, bat-like wings, and sharp little claws. Oh, and before I forget, they also breathed fire because So why do dragons have such varied descriptions, and why do so many unrelated cultures attest to their existence? It's because the real dragons had varied looks and lived in different parts of the world. Long after they were gone, their remains turned into fossils, which humans found and used to describe what they looked like. Some were huge, others were not, some had sharp claws, some had bat-like wings, and some may have had reptile-like bodies. Granted, I don't think any of them, actually I know for a fact, none of them breathed fire from their mouths. Lastly, they prefer to be called dinosaurs, not dragons. Yeah, what do you know? Dinosaurs are the origin of the dragon myth. Many cultures, particularly those in ancient China, where tales of dragons are many, came up with dragons after finding fossils of dinosaurs. Okay, can somebody tell the folks over at Jurassic Park? Well, what else do you suggest doing with that knowledge? Let me know in the comments. Speaking of flying, Maori folklore tells of the existence of a giant flying bird with a fondness for snatching humans off the ground and carrying them away for consumption. They call the bird Pouakai, which means old glutton in English. As Frederick Richardson Fuller, a taxidermist at Canterbury Museum, later found out in 1871, that bird really existed. The Haast eagle, as it is now known, was the largest eagle to ever roam the earth. Its wings alone reached 3 meters, and its primary prey was the larger and extinct moa bird, which weighed between 100 to 250 kilograms. Now, for humans, we weigh a lot less, so the bird might have actually really hunted us. The Haast eagle and moa evolved independently of humans. This means the eagle might have confused the first humans to land on New Zealand with the moa, since the humans probably wore clothes made out of feathers. Or it might have just not cared and was like, new addition to the menu, I like it. Either way, really looked yummy to them, and that's all that matters. Many years ago, sailors brought back tales of so-called wild men of Asia and Africa, which gave rise to the tale of the Blemmyae. These people were described as headless men and were said to be covered with hair. They didn't have heads, which left their facial features on their chest. Europeans were fascinated by what they heard, and the legend kind of grew for centuries. These creatures were written about by Pliny the Elder, Sir Walter Raleigh, and there was even mention of them in Othello. Yeah, Shakespeare. There are 2 possible sources for this creature, and the most likely being a far-fetched description of gorillas. These days you can find gorillas in zoos all over the world, but they weren't described in scientific journals until about the mid-1800s. Poorly told tales of enlarged primates might have planted the seed that grew into this myth. Another possible source might have been African tribesmen, who would lower their heads as they walked. This could give the appearance of people without heads and facial features on their chests. It's possible the myth arose from descriptions of both the tribesmen and gorillas, only they morphed into a single mythological beast over time. Imoogi are Korean dragons, which resemble all forms of Chinese dragons. They're often depicted as long, snake-like reptiles with 4 legs, but unlike European dragons, they don't have wings, and they are considered benevolent creatures related to water and agriculture. I promise, it's not a dinosaur this time. While there's no such creature in fossil record, there is something similar called the Titanoboa. It's a creature I feel like I've talked about ad nauseum over on Top 5 Scary Videos, but let me give you the cliff notes if you're unfamiliar, because this is Bumblebee. Titanoboa was the largest snake to ever slither across the ground, and various specimens have been found indicating they could grow up to 42 feet in length and weigh as much as 2,500 pounds. It's unlikely anybody in Korea would have ever seen the bones of a Titanoboa, as the creature's range was throughout the rainforests of what is now South America. They died out between 50 million years ago, so the comparison between the myth and the reality is pretty coincidental. Unless you believe they still exist, but that's a whole other debate for another day. Like most dragon myths, the Imoogi likely arose from ancient people who found bones belonging to extinct species. Korean findings that gave rise to the myth of dragons likely came from marine reptiles or dinosaur fossils. Additionally, tall tales spread about creatures like these ones until they explode into mythological beasts. In games like Dungeons & Dragons or television series like Game of Thrones, dire wolves have been depicted as gigantic wolves capable of easily taking down a large man. They're often described as vicious, hard to train, and efficient killers, but the myth doesn't exactly line up with the reality. Also known as Canis dirus, these creatures were real animals and went extinct around 9,500 years ago when the last major ice age came to an end. They weren't like any gigantic monsters, but they were big animals. Most specimens Specimens that have been studied show the dire wolf to be about the same size as modern gray wolves. They weighed around 132 pounds and were capable predators. Their teeth were larger and had a better shearing ability than their modern cousins. They had the strongest bite force at the point of the canine of all canis species. This made it possible for them to prey on horses, camels, bison, and humans living during that time. It's likely that tales of their ferocity gave life to the mythological abilities of the animal, which persist today. Sadly, they're long gone, even if they do sometimes pop up in our nightmares. And that's it from me once again, folks. I've been Alexa, your resident emo girly. See y'all next time I buzz in over here at Bumblebee. I'm sure we all know by now Bloody hell.